enrolled at a college or a university. So something we're trying to get away from is that idea that everything that goes through a college or university is the only thing that counts. There's a lot of learning that happens outside of the walls of colleges. I'm sure a lot of you have done plenty of research on your own besides what you've done in your classrooms to help you learn how to teach. So how do we show that that learning is valuable too? And badges can help with that as well. And badges are assessed by peers, and this is a little bit of a new concept for a lot of people, but it has been happening for quite some time in classrooms, where you're having people work together in groups or assess each other's work or work on drafts together. So if you have a bunch of students reviewing each other's labs and making sure that they're not making mistakes, or a group work where they all have to come up with an experiment together, you can have them assess each other through a badging system. And in this way, not only are you motivating them to do their best because they want to impress their peers, but you're also teaching them sort of the values and skills that they need to have to do well by using a peer assessment system. In the field, assess your work. Sometimes we get lost in that top-down mentality, and you don't really have anyone come in besides a teacher to talk to you or your students. And so sometimes it's nice to have an expert in the field come in and give badges. Obviously, they can't give grades to your students, but they certainly can give them badges. College faculty, that applies more to you. Of course, within SUNY Empire, we're hoping to issue badges at some point, and college faculty, of course, can also issue those badges. Institutions. So, for example, NASA, they're starting to look at a badge program. So if you take your students to the NASA website, they do a bunch of activities, they can earn badges there. And employers. We're hoping to push this out, to school districts eventually. But have something that can go on your resume. So if you're going above and beyond your normal duties, you have a science club after school. A lot of times teachers nowadays aren't necessarily getting paid for that, but how do you recognize that achievement? Publishing a scientific journal at your school. So badges are also often assessed by employers too. Oh, thank you. Badges are different from prior learning assessment. If any of you were here as an undergrad student, you may have completed prior learning assessment. It's a way of taking individualized learning and giving credit for it. We sort of want to get away from the idea that badges replace grades. And so the badging system doesn't necessarily replace grades. There are some similarities between the two, but we really want to get away from that model. Grades are more top-down. They're often not given out by peers. They focus on a specific outcome or rubric that you're trying to achieve, and badges don't always necessarily do that. They can also be given at multiple levels of mastery. So instead of giving someone a 65 for only getting part way there on an assignment, or giving an oral presentation and saying, you really only had basic oral presentation skills there, you can give them a badge instead. So it helps them sort of define what skill level they're at, as opposed to saying you've only really completed 65% of this outcome. It's a little bit different than grading. They can also be used for a greater variety of experiences and content fields. So again, there's that idea that if you're not actually teaching a skill in your class, you can't really assess it or give a grade for it. So if you're not teaching your students actively how to give oral presentations and spending, several classes going through what makes a good speech, what makes a bad speech, you can't really put it on a rubric then and grade a student for it. So how do you then make sure that they're doing a good job, motivating them and rewarding them when they're doing a good job? And badges can really do that. It's hard to say, well, you only had a 65% there, or 75%, 85% of goodness in an oral presentation. What does that really mean? There are certain skills like soft skills as opposed to hard skills, soft skills being communication skills, visual skills that are really hard to assess using a grading system. So badges allow for that. So an example of a badge here would be excellent aesthetics in digital media. So if someone had a really great PowerPoint presentation, they really used colors effectively, they really used images effectively, you could give them a badge. Again, it's not really focusing on the science aspect of class, so you can't give them a grade for it, but you certainly can motivate them to do the best that they can do. It's also not just for demonstrated learning, it can also be for skills or experiences. So if you have students, you require students to complete 10 out of 15 labs in your class, and you have someone complete all 15. You can give them a badge for going above and beyond in lab work by completing those extra 5 labs. So again, it's not like a skill that they've necessarily learned or any learning they've necessarily done, but by finishing a goal. A lot of badges come from that angle instead. And it can also lead to higher level badges, so a bunch of component skills all together. So again, going back to that idea of presentation skills. So you could give a badge for having really good PowerPoint slides, having a really good tone, making eye contact, and then have all of those badges fit together into excellent presentation skills badge. They can also be determined by peers. So again, really focusing on that peer-to-peer contact. Of course, you can oversee them and moderate the badges in your classroom, but you do want to let students sometimes experiment with sort of grading themselves and each other. They're sometimes a lot harder on each other than sometimes people would think, especially if they know that someone else in the class won't know their identity. It's more anonymous. They can be quite hard on each other. Or even if you have peer mentors in the system. So a fit into your chemistry class that they taught last year or took last year, and looking at some of the labs and what they've done and assessing it from their point of view after successfully completing the class. It can also be recommended for badges. So a peer can say, I saw this great work that Anne did the other day. I really think she should get a badge for that. And then you look at that work and say, yeah, she really did go above and beyond. And again, it's not something you would necessarily grade, but it is something that you can still recognize within your classroom. And for you guys in particular, they can be pushed out beyond the college or university, and in your case, beyond your school. So if you do have seniors taking physics and they have, great oral presentation skills, they have great writing skills, they have great digital skills, they know how to create PowerPoint and use Excel and Twitter and YouTube and all of the other things you've talked about in this class, they can put it on their resumes for colleges and universities to look at, or if they're going into the job world. So those are some differences between that idea of grading and what badges are. So what does a badge system look like? So I've talked about sort of the theory behind badges, but what do they look like? Where do they go? So there's an issuer, and a lot of times that'll be you as teachers, or for professional environment, that could be your employer or your college or university. We're looking right now to use Mozilla's badge backpack. Unfortunately, it won't be ready for your students because they are minors and they're still working out some legal kinks about internet safety and FERPA laws, but we're hoping to create a model for anyone who's not a minor over 18. And they're private until the earner gives permission. So that's a really big focus too on badges. So if you give your student a great oral presentation badge, they might not want to share that with everyone, or they might want to, so you can give them the space where they can put it on their locker, or you can have a bulletin board, and they can choose to post that badge up there. In your case, if you earn badges at Empire State College, for example, or peer-to-peer universities, offering badges for programming, etc. And you do it through Mozilla's Backpack, you actually give permission to let universities or colleges or employers or the public or parents of your students look at your badges. So there is that idea of privacy there. But since most of your students will be minors and they won't be able to use a Mozilla Backpack, how would you create badges in your own school district then? Well, one of the ways to do this is by coming up either in your district or even in your department or in your classroom, coming up with a badge system. And it doesn't have to be huge. It can be a collection of 10 badges, looking at a bunch of different skills that you really value in science or you really value in students in general. So then coming up with images for each of these badges. So you might create a did extra work during the summer badge, you successfully completed extra labs badge, you tutored another student for the Regents exam badge, you were a mentor to a student in a past class you've taken badge. And that work really sets up that community where everyone values these badges and wants to participate. And then at the end of the semester or the end of the year, you can have a badge granting ceremony either again in your district, in your school, or within your discipline. So all the science teachers get together on one day and really recognize what badges people have earned. You can do poster presentations where parents come in and they look at the badges that students have earned, or just have something in your classroom the very last day of class, have a big party and everyone can talk about the projects that they've worked on. And that way you really, get some value out of badges. So badge earners, they can be pushed out to others, and that's, a really key feature of badges is that you're able to share these badges with other people. So you might get a professional development badge as an adult and want to share that with your school district. Your students might get a really good presentation badge, and they might want to share that with their summer job, for example. So it's a way to really document those skills. You can also organize them by group. For privacy restrictions, you can choose to share some, not share some. And also, especially for you guys, you can put them on digital resumes and job applications. So one of the problems right now with a lot of certificates, diplomas, for example, resumes, they don't really link to anything that you've done. So you could say, yeah, I took Spanish, I'm fluent in Spanish. There's really no way for an employer to prove that unless they're also fluent in Spanish. So here is a way to say, yeah, the community of Spanish speakers really recognizes you know Spanish. And here's the YouTube video that links from this digital badge that shows you speaking Spanish or teaching another student. And the same thing would work with you. Here's an example of you presenting a great physics lecture, or an example of a website you've created, and you can actually link that to the badge. So when someone clicks on the badge, they go right to that website. Teachers can see it, parents can see it, your school district can see it and say, yeah, this kid knows what he's talking about. And the same sort of thing can happen within your classroom. So again, if you create badges, you want to link that to some form of actual content. So again, having a poster session where you present the badges is a really good idea to recognize those specific projects and achievements students have done. Okay, so why badges? Well, a lot of factors of why badges and not certificates or just giving grades. Well, they're a great motivating factor here. Peer-to-peer assessment, authentic assessment is huge right now. Everyone's looking at it, and it's really showing some great results in how to motivate students. There's already a badge system that Global Kids is creating. It's mostly for their after-school activities. A lot of students have some developmental difficulties that they're working with, or are behind, or there are particular students that are at risk, and so they're working with how to build the momentum, how to build this lifelong learning of their students in K through 6 schools most of the time. So they're using these paper badges where, you know, a 5-year-old can color in the little section that they earned, and then show to their parents, you know, I earned this badge in my after school program, you know, I'm really doing good work here, I'm building my skills. And of course you can't get grades for an after school program, but this is a way to motivate that learning that's happening that you otherwise wouldn't be able to give credit for. They're really great for professional development. So if you take a class on the internet that's open and free, like some of the MIT courses or the iTunes U course, how can you show your employer that you really did take that class? And open badging is great for this. It also recognizes skills, experience, and lifelong learning that don't usually get recognized. So you might, after this discussion, rush online and learn all about open badging. Well, guess what? There's actually a badge for that. You can go to the openbadges.org, and there's a What is Badging badge. So if you want to